Dr. Lott.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to thank Chairman Sears and also Robert Norris, who's the one who invited me to testify, and the other distinguished members of the committee to talk to you about this bill. There are a few points I'd like to make. One is that rifles are very rarely used in crime. If you look at Vermont, for example, over the last 5 years, the FBI data shows from 2017 to 2021, there were only a total of 2 murders committed with any type of rifle. Nationally, you see a similar pattern. The FBI data shows that only about 2% of murders involve any type of rifle. Obviously, assault weapons are just a category of that. If you're talking about something like mass public shootings over the last 25 years, assault weapons are rarely used there. 58% of mass public shootings involve only handguns, and 14% involve solely rifles of any variety. So obviously, purely assault weapons are just a fraction of that. And the attacks with the highest casualty rates are the ones that involve multiple weapons rather than just ones that involve rifles. There's a lot of academic research on assault weapon bans, and essentially it finds overwhelmingly no crime-reducing benefit from those bans. The largest survey of American academics was published in Regulation, and if you look at academics who have published peer-reviewed research, American academics who have published peer-reviewed research on gun control, on a 1 to 10 scale where 1 is completely ineffective and 10 is extremely effective, and so 5 is the midpoint, criminologists rated that particular regulation at a 1.7, economists at 1.57, so they're almost agreeing that it's completely ineffective. Public health people gave it a higher rating of a 4, but that's still even below the midpoint, even for them. Overall, you're talking about a rating across all the academics of something in the 2 range. There's been, as I say, a lot of research, but even research the Clinton administration funded, which put the assault weapons ban in effect, such as by Cooper and Roth, in their 1997 report for the National Institute of Justice, or their follow-up report in 2004, could find no statistically significant evidence of a benefit from assault weapons ban. The National Research Council, in their report on firearms and violence, also could not point to significant evidence that the assault weapons ban reduced any type of violent crime. In 2001, federal judge in California, Roger Benitez, struck down California's assault weapons ban. He concluded that the state experts who summarized the existing research, despite numerous requests from the judge, could not provide any evidence that the prohibition reduced violent crimes such as murders, robberies, or aggravated assaults. We frequently we'll hear statements such as President Biden just in the State of the Union, which would say, when we passed the assault weapons ban, mass shootings went down. When the law expired, mass shootings tripled. What he's relying on is a unique definition from one researcher, Louis Clarivas, at the Teachers College at Columbia. And his definition inconsistently includes shootings involving drug gangs fighting over drug turf. His other unique parts of his definition too. The FBI, in their definition, first of all, his definition doesn't even use that consistently. But the FBI, when they define things like active shootings or mass public shootings, what they look at are shootings in public that don't involve some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf. They also look at 4 or more people killed as compared to his. And there's a reason why they do that, and that is they want to focus on the ones that get people's attention, like a shooting at a mall or a school or a business, where the whole point of the attack is simply to go and kill other people. But there's an important point here, and that is even in the quote that I mentioned before, there's no drop in attacks with assault weapons when the ban occurred. What they point to is a drop in overall mass shootings. And if you think that the assault weapons ban is going to have any effect, it's going to have an effect through reducing attacks involving so-called assault weapons. And that's not what you see. In fact, what you find is that when the ban went into effect, the percentage of attacks involving assault weapons rose. And when the ban sunset in 2004, the percent of attacks involving assault weapons fell, which is the exact opposite of what you would predict if you thought that the assault weapons ban was relevant for stopping attacks. Even the Associated Press last year, in its highly influential style book, essentially said that the term assault weapon is nonsensical. The AP said that the term, quote, conveys little meaning, end quote, and is, quote, highly politicized. They also pointed out that, that these so-called assault weapons that are being talked about are not actually used by any militaries around the world. They discussed the fact that the term that's often used is military style, and what makes it, relevant there is the word style, as opposed to what actual weapons that you're talking about. We've heard this morning a reference to semi-automatic guns generally. And, if you were to ban, let's say, all semi-automatic rifles, which at least would be more logically consistent than banning ones that are, quote, military style, because there are other weapons. When you're talking about military style, there are other rifles out there that are functionally identical, firing the same bullets with the same rapidity, doing the exact same damage, that don't fall under the so-called assault weapons label there. If you were to replace semi-automatic guns with manually loaded guns, it takes much longer to go and manually put another bullet in the chamber after you fire a round. If somebody is using a gun defensively, where they have to fire multiple rounds because they're facing multiple criminals, or because they fire and miss, or because they wound the attacker but don't incapacitate them, they may not have the luxury of time for going and manually reloading the gun another time. There's a reason why about 85% of the handguns in the United States are semi-automatics, and that a similar percentage of rifles in the United States are semi-automatics. With regard to mass public shootings, I can only speculate what the motivation for carving out those who are under 21 would be. But possibly one of the motivations is with regard to mass public shootings. And if I've provided graphs in the handout that I hope you received. But if you compare under 21 to 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, 51 to 60, or over 60, if you're going to use that as the standard for deciding whether or not to ban the ownership of guns, you actually have a higher rate of mass public shootings for the 21 to 30 range all the way up to the 50 years of age. If 41 to 50 is essentially the same rate of engaging in mass public shootings as those under 21, and from 21 to 40, it's actually at a higher rate. And even if you break it down by 5-year intervals, I show there that it's still much lower than many other age groups. 21 to 25 or 36 to 45 have higher rates of engaging in these mass public shootings. We just heard a little bit about the Bruin case. I've taught in law schools. Maybe I should just tell you my background for a second. I should have done this to begin with. But I've been chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission. I was more recently senior advisor for research and statistics at the U.S. Department of Justice. I've been an academic most of my life. I've had research and teaching positions at Yale Law School, The University of
Dr. Lott,
Yeah.
how long were you at the Department of Justice?
I was there for just less than 6 months. I was there at the end of 2020 and through January, most January of 2021.
Thank you.
I was at the Sentencing Commission for 2 years. And I've had positions at the Wharton Business School, was there for 4 years. And University of Chicago, I was at the University of Chicago Law School and then the University of Chicago Business School, a total of 5 years. I was at Stanford and I've been at Rice and UCLA. But just concentrating on Bruin here for a second, kind of the historical background. If you look to see early state laws around 1791 and after that for some period of time, you in fact find that most states actually required that younger people possess guns in order to be able to serve in the militia. For example, Connecticut's militia law made a requirement for those starting at age 16. Pennsylvania had a requirement for those 17 to 55 years old, quote, shall be sufficiently armed with one good musket and other firelock well fixed, end quote. In my writings there, I gave a link to historian Clayton Kramer, who has collected those things, those types of laws for other states at that time. And, rather than actually banning young people to be able to go and have guns, the states explicitly mandated that they had to be able to go and own guns. And it was for younger ages than even 18 in many cases. I'll mention one other discussion, and that's the defacing of serial numbers on guns. Obviously, there's already federal law on this that has up to a 5-year prison sentence and fines. I don't really care much one way or the other about serial numbers, but I think it's still useful to point out that they're really not the benefits that you might think from it. In theory, serial numbers on guns are useful for helping to solve crimes. In practice, that really never happens. And, in theory, if a criminal leaves a gun at a crime scene, even when you have states that have registration, which would be tied to the serial numbers that are there, in theory, if a criminal leaves a gun at a crime scene and it's registered to the criminal, then you could go and trace it back to the criminal and solve the crime. In fact, crime guns are virtually never left at the crime scene. And the few times that they are left at the crime scene is because the criminal's been either killed or seriously wounded, so you've caught him anyway. And the couple times that they are left at the crime scene where that's not occurring, what you find is that the gun isn't registered to the person who committed the crime. And you look through it, there's testimony on the record for the places that have it. Hawaii's had registration and licensing of guns since 1960. They can't point to a single crime that they've been able to solve as a result of registration and licensing. Washington, D.C. has had it for decades. They can't point to a single crime. Pennsylvania has had registration of handguns since 1901. And there are court cases where the state police there have had to acknowledge that they've been unable to solve one crime as a result of having registration there in the state. So this is something that's costly. It's something that takes some resources. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm stuck on something that you mentioned earlier, and
Sure.
I'm kind of confused here. You mentioned that serial numbers are not used in application when it comes to investigating or solving crime. Was that right? That you mentioned that?
I didn't say they were never used. What I said was they're not used successfully to solve crimes. You will not find a gun being traced back to the criminal that's there in order to solve the crime. And I can go and give you in the written testimony I have. You will see that, in fact, in places where you even have registration attached to guns, so that a serial number, a unique serial number, is attached to a person's registration. Even in those cases, the police are unable to point to cases where serial numbers have been used to solve crimes. Violent crimes.
One thing that I want to mention, though, is that as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in this bill that involves creating a registry database, and I do just have to disagree that serial numbers are not used successfully. I've used them plenty of times when I was a trooper. One of the last arrests that I made involved around $10,000 worth of firearms. All the serial numbers were documented, used to match between different incidents, and so I'm just have to voice that I disagree that the serial numbers are not useful in these searches.
In terms of actually linking the criminal to the crime, and I didn't say you were trying to do registration. What I said was even in states that have also had registration. And again, I don't feel strongly about this one way or the other. I know you're talking about defacing serial numbers on guns. I mean, first of all, just as an aside, it's essentially impossible to effectively remove a serial number from the gun, because the stamping in the metal changes the underlying metal that's there, and it's always possible to go and pull out what the serial number is there. But I'm just saying, I can give you testimony even in places that have registration where police have been there many times, and it's a common joke around the Department of Justice. I've talked to people that have involved there, and it's what you see on television shows such as Law and Order, where registration and license and serial numbers are used to solve crimes. In practice, at least in the places that have both registration and serial numbers, haven't been effective.
Thank you, Dr. I appreciate the response. And Senator Baruth also has a follow-up.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Lott. You went over your credentials. I'm glad that you did. We have been mailed, on the committee, we've been mailed a series of articles about you. And you might suspect they're not complimentary. And I know you've been engaged in a back and forth, as one might expect in the gun rights space. But I'm thinking of, there's a New Yorker profile of you, and it, as I say, not complimentary, but it talks about a 2003 incident of creating an online persona for yourself.
Right.
And using that persona, which was purportedly a young woman who needed to use guns for her own defense, using that to support your work. It was discovered that it was you. I'm wondering if you can just give us an explanation from your point of view of what was going on there.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, this reporter, Michael Spies, who did the article, was paid, I believe, $150,000 from the Trace, which is Michael Bloomberg's kind of news organization on this. And he spent something like 14 months going through my life on this, interviewing people that I hadn't talked to for decades. But you can get some idea from the funding that he got there where he may be coming from on this issue. He never asked me about that particular incident. He didn't go and use any of the times that I've talked about that multiple times. What had happened was, after my research came out in 1998, I got a number of death threats. And I, at the urging of some other academics, I engaged in internet chat rooms where I would go and use my own name for a while. What happened, though, is that people would come in off the street to continue those discussions afterwards. And to put it mildly, these were not the most pleasant circumstances, okay, when they would come in. My family had set up an email address for my 4 sons. And it involved the first 2 letters of each of their names, Maryrosh. And it was an email address and an account that was essentially accessible by anybody in my family. So I used that. The one reference, the one thing that goes and talks about it actually being a woman was not myself who posted that on the internet. You will not see any other discussion other than that one. And I talked to them after I saw that they had posted that, or a while afterwards when I realized what had happened there. And they did not use it again after that point. But anything that I put up using that email address was essentially so that I didn't, in fact, you know, I don't know if you know kind of these old internet chat rooms, but I would say 95% or so of the people, even the other people who are obviously academics, weren't using their actual names on it. And I used my name for a while, but it was only when I actually had 2 people come in off the street and were very threatening in terms of continuing conversations that I started to use that other email address that was there.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I'm an academic myself. I do wonder why other academics would have advised you to go into internet chat rooms to do what you're doing.
Well, David Friedman, Milton Friedman's son, was one person who had done that. And he just said that it'd be useful to kind of, because a lot of academics were participating in that, just to go and be able to go and answer their questions on things. And then, and in addition, as soon as I was asked if I was the one who was using that email address, I immediately, within minutes, acknowledged that I was doing it. In fact, in many of my posts, were just cutting and pasting from other things that I had written in responses to people's questions that were there. So other than just trying to avoid kind of kooky people going and causing problems, I really didn't go out of my way in any way to hide. As soon as I was asked, because what happened was I was using the IP address that was associated with the account there was what they call dynamic IP address. So it was constantly changing. And the only thing that somebody could find was that the email address, the IP was associated with someplace in southeastern Pennsylvania. And so and I was spending part of my time in southeastern Pennsylvania, part of my time in Washington, D.C. And when I was asked about it, because they said they couldn't figure out for sure who was it, even though I didn't have to, I immediately said I was the one who was using the email address.
Thank you very much.
And I put that out. I would have been happy to talk to Michael Spies about it, but he never asked me any questions about that when he was writing up his New York article.
Thank you. You're welcome to continue your testimony if you have anything else.
No, I'm pretty much done on this stuff, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. I mean, the bottom line, I think, is pretty clear with regard to focusing on assault weapons per se. Pretty clear with regard to the research that's there and what academics overwhelmingly who have worked on this issue think in terms of reducing crime. If you're doing it for trying to concern about mass public shootings, purely rifles of any type are rarely used, and I'm not sure why you would use that to single out people who are under 21 when you actually have higher rates of mass public shootings involving older age groups.
And I have one quick question. Thanks for being here, Dr. Lott. Senator Bob Norris.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, we here in Montpelier, as a body as a whole, have a couple of distinctions. One is we need to, what I believe is work in the best interest of our constituents, whether it's safety or whatever else,
Right.
along with trying to not preserve, but actually keep intact the Second Amendment of the Constitution. Now, having said that, I have concerns in both areas, obviously, but in your opinion only, and I'm not asking for statistics or whatever else, is there a clear distinction between gun laws and gun control? And if there is anything such as gun control that exists, what would that possibly look like in your opinion?
You're asking me what types of gun laws I'd like to have, or you're asking, I'm not sure I understand the last part of your question.
All right, let me rephrase it. Are gun laws ultimately gun control? It's going to lead to gun control is what I'm looking for.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose it's probably hard to think of a distinction between those two. I mean, there's going to be certain laws that impose relatively minor, costs on people, and there's going to be others that are going to be imposing a lot more. But I assume it's probably a matter of degree rather than of type.
Okay, so in reference to what's referred to as gun control, with the number of firearms we have in and throughout the United States, more importantly, Vermont is what I'm really concerned about. Obviously, is there such a thing as gun control? You believe?
I mean, do I support gun control or whatever? But I mean, look.
I'm not asking if you support it or not, Doctor. I'm simply asking, like using Australia as, for instance, and many other countries who just have banned them and they're purchasing them back, they're turning them into whatever else. Is that a workable solution, do you feel?
Well, I don't think it's going to reduce crime. Look, let me give you a simple example. If guns on net are bad, you would think banning guns would reduce murder rates or homicide rates. And yet every single place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns has seen an increase in murder rates, often very large 3-fold, even 7-fold increases immediately after the bans have gone into effect. You'd think out of randomness, one time, you would see murder rates go down or at least even stay the same. You know, Americans are familiar with what happened in Washington, D.C. and Chicago, with the increases in murder rates and violent crime rates that occurred after their handgun bans. Gun control advocates will say that those were unfair tests because people were still able to go and obtain guns from, the rest of Illinois or Indiana or from Maryland and Virginia. The thing is, that doesn't really explain why murder rates went up. It may explain why it didn't go down as they were initially predicted that they were going to do. But you see huge increases, and you see increases even in island nations, whether it's Jamaica or the Republic of Ireland or the UK, after they've had various types of gun bans being put into effect. And there's a simple reason for that, and this applies to gun control generally, not just with bans. And that is when you pass a law, you have to be careful that it's not just primarily the most law-abiding good citizens who obey the rules. Because if you have a ban and it's the most law-abiding good citizens who turn in their guns and are disarmed, you actually, you may take some guns away from criminals, but you actually make it easier than for criminals to go and commit crimes. Now, let me give you once.
Just for the purposes of time, do you have any other questions?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
I saw Senator Sears
I do.
a while ago, and then Senator Bruce, and then I also have a question too.
Sure.
My question has to do with, first of all, thank you for being here, but I wanted to give you a little history of the bill. This bill is designed to deal with the problem in Vermont that we've recently been having with young people, particularly young people, coming here from other states, selling drugs.
Right.
And in doing that, they frequently have traded firearms for drugs because Vermont is a very open state in terms of obtaining firearms. So they find somebody to make what's called a straw purchase, and that's the reason for that language. Our local law enforcement, particularly in my neck of the woods, Bennington County, has seen a huge increase in the number, the use of firearms and actually shooting, and we've had a couple of murders, which is rare for this part of Vermont and the southeastern part, southwestern, excuse me. And so that's the genesis of the bill. But my question is, what we've tried to do in this committee over the years is try to identify perhaps people that shouldn't possess firearms. Fugitives from justice, for example. It's in the bill because we left that off. Domestic violence abuse. And people who are a danger to themselves or others through a red flag. So those are the types of activities we've normally undertaken. There's been some other bills that have passed dealing with firearms that I haven't supported personally, but I've always supported efforts to reduce the number who can possess.
Right.
I wonder if you could comment on those types, given your recent your comment regarding taking away from criminals.
Right. Sure. No, I think that's extremely important what you're trying to do there. Look, a major source across the whole country of illegal drugs are guns are drug dealers. Drug dealers, you know, it's not like a drug dealer can go to the police and say, this other gang stole my drugs. Can you help us get them back? They have to essentially go set up their own little militaries in order to protect that very valuable property that they have. And if they can go, so they're going to have guns. And if they can go and make money selling drugs or selling guns, they're going to do that. You know, you could look at a country like Mexico, for example, which has had only one gun store in the country since 1972, run by the military. The most powerful gun that you've been able to buy since 1972 legally in Mexico is a .22 caliber short round bolt action rifle. That's not the gun that drug gangs use there. The murder rate in Mexico has more than doubled since the 1972 law went into effect. They actually, in recent years, have had a murder rate that's been as high as 6 times higher than the murder rate that we've had in the United States. The bottom line in the discussion for both the United States and Mexico as an example is how difficult it is to go and stop drug gangs from getting a hold of illegal drugs. And similarly, how difficult it is, you're going to be just as successful, I think, in stopping them from being able to go and get a hold of guns. You know, if I could go and click my fingers right now and cause all guns in the United States to disappear and all illegal drugs, how long do you think it would be before illegal drugs started coming back into the United States? It would be, you know, 20 minutes if you're in El Paso. How long would it be until they bring in the weapons that they would use to go and protect that valuable property? And just to give you an example how important this is, we recently came out with a study pointing out how incredibly concentrated murders are in the United States. 1% of the counties in the United States account for 42% of the murders, okay? The worst 5% of the counties account for 73% of the murders. Over half the counties in the United States have 0 murders, and another 20%, almost 20%, have 1 murder. So 70% of the counties in the United States have 0 or 1 murder, and you have 73% with, or 5% with 73% of the murders. And the thing is, if you look at those counties, let's say the 1% worst counties that have this huge share of the murders, even in those counties, the murders are extremely heavily concentrated. Almost 2/3 of their murders occur within 10-block areas within those counties. It's, you know, obviously Vermont isn't one of these places that we're talking about here, but it's the reason why it's in those areas and so heavily concentrated is that those are the areas that you have the worst drug gang problems in the United States. And so the problem that you're going to have to deal with in order to stop you know, drug dealers and drug gangs from going and trafficking in guns is going to have to deal with getting rid of the profits that are there for selling illegal drugs. Because until you are able to go and do that, you're going to get both the illegal drugs and the weapons that they're going to have a huge incentive for going and obtaining. And you see the same pattern with alcohol prohibition in the United States. You know, most people don't know this, but probably the highest murder rate that we ever had in the United States was in 1932, which was the last year of prohibition. Within 2 years after prohibition had ended in the United States, the murder rate had fallen by about 60%. And you had the same type of situation there. You know, the mob was fighting against other mobs in order to try to control the sale of alcohol in different cities that you had. And so they had to have weapons in order to protect the valuable property that they had. And so, I mean, that's, I understand what you're saying completely. But the issue that you still have there is that if you have this prohibition, not only are you going to make it so that it's not going to affect a lot of these drug gangs very much, because, as I mentioned, how difficult it is to stop them from getting either the illegal drugs, and you know how hard police and law enforcement has tried to stop them from getting illegal drugs to go and sell over the decades. But not only do you have that, but you also have the situation where there's law-abiding citizens who are the ones who are going to be obeying the law and are going to be disarmed and are not going to have, you know, these semi-automatic guns in order to go and protect themselves. So if you have a woman who's being stalked or threatened in some way, she's going to be disarmed and not going to be able to go and defend herself as well.
Oh, sorry, Senator Sears, do you have more?
No, my internet is unstable, so I haven't had my video on.
Okay, I hope I answered your question, sir.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Dr. Lott, just a quick question. I know you had mentioned some island countries. This is going back to some earlier testimony. You mentioned some island countries, and
right.
Despite the bans, there was a between 3 to 7-fold increase in homicides, I believe you said afterwards.
Well, it depends on the country, but if you're talking about the Republic of Ireland or you're talking about Jamaica, there was those types of increases. If you're talking about the United Kingdom, after their January 1997 handgun ban, over the next 8 years, there was a 50% increase in the homicide rate.
So specifically for Ireland and Jamaica, you know, I'm curious, you know, if you factored in the fact that they both been involved in a civil war for, I mean, in Ireland's case,
sure,
almost 800 years, Jamaica, 1950s or 1940s. Do you take into consideration the civil wars that might be contributing to these?
Yeah, well, I mean, there obviously were years afterwards where you had political violence that occurred in Jamaica, but even if you remove those particular years, you see an immediate increase in homicides that occurred right after the ban went into effect, and it's still, you know, more than twice as high afterwards, even when you remove the years that they had political violence that was occurring there. A lot of it was just drug gang violence that they had, and that's dealing with the types of issues that Senator Sears was just asking about. With regard to Ireland, we're talking about the Republic of Ireland, not Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland was not directly involved in the type of you know, religious warfare between the Catholics and the Protestants that Northern Ireland was involved with. And the Republic of Ireland hasn't had the type of political violence that Northern Ireland had. And yet you see immediately, right after the gun ban went into effect in the 70s, an immediate huge increase in homicides in the country.
So, all right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Sears, do you have it? I don't think senators.
I think, are there any, I don't have any other questions. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lott.
I greatly appreciate your
Is it
time.
doctor? I'm sorry,
Yeah, I have a
It's like-
PhD. I have a PhD in economics.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad.
Thank
I
you.
frequently have promoted or demoted police officers from their rank.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your conscientiousness on that. I appreciate it.
And Dr.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. And I'm more than happy to answer any follow-up questions. You know, on the write-up that I gave you, my email address should be there on the front of it, and you feel free to contact me if you have any further questions. Thank you.